Elaine, it's so great to connect today. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
As you think about the things you've learned through your consulting, through your writing, through your teaching, what lesson would you most want to pass on to others?
Yeah, I'm going to narrow that question
Great.
of the thing I've learned the most is that silence is actually learned behavior. And the reason I'm starting there is because we don't tend to talk about silence. The conversations about leadership, about having difficult conversations, about negotiation are some version of just do it, right? You should do it in this way. You need to up level your skill set. And we don't talk about what holds us back and what gets in the way. And it's a multifaceted factor to me of silence, of the silence I've learned over time, the habits I've built, the assumptions that are there that have calcified that I don't really question because they're invisible to me. And in what ways do other people silence us? We just don't talk about that. And that to me is the big unlock.
Okay, so I think back to like when I was a kid, and I think back to most kids. Most kids just talk, 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 talk. And then, of course,
Hmm.
we're socialized to try to figure out when it is appropriate and when isn't it
Hmm.
appropriate. So,
Hmm.
how do you think about this now, navigating when it's appropriate, when it's not appropriate, and trying to unlearn the things
Hmm.
you've learned that aren't helpful to you?
Yeah, I'd actually take those questions a step further, which is who's deciding what's appropriate,
Yeah.
when's appropriate, right? All of those assumptions, the power dynamics, the privilege that's baked into that, that's all stuff we don't talk about. And so when I'm thinking about when is it appropriate, I might actually ask a different question, which is when does it make sense? When does it make sense for me? And take it back also to the questions, how do I want to live? What are the things I value? Who am I? And then if voice is not just the words that we say in a meeting, but how we move through the world, how are we moving through the world with agency? And also, how are we moving through in a way that creates space for other people to also move from a place of agency, that we're all not just replicating the behaviors that we see or that we're socialized, but really questioning in what ways do those assumptions that we've learned over time serve us? How have they served us in the past? Do they still serve who we are today and who we want to become?
So, what are some of those assumptions that either we get wrong or
Mm.
assumptions that you've kind of changed your perspective on over time?
Yeah, I mean, one assumption that is ingrained into so many of us is children should be seen and not heard. And I say this with great conflict now as a parent, because there are times when I really just want my kid to be silent. And
Yeah.
then I have to be thinking, what's the end game? I want you to have an opinion. I want you to believe that you have influence and that you have the muscles to steward that influence. I think that's been a big piece of unlearning for me. You know, I'm the youngest daughter of an immigrant family from Taiwan to the United States. I share all of that because in that construct, girls are not as important as boys. And if you're the youngest, you should be listening, you should defer to your elders, right?
Yeah.
Because to defer or to be quiet is to show respect. I want to respect my elders and I want to respect the people in my life. I also want to find a balance for how can I add to the conversation when things are missing? Or how do I uh, draw a line when things have crossed a boundary or before they cross a boundary? But I can't do any of that unless I'm aware of what assumptions am I holding? How are those habits manifesting? How that played out for me in the workplace was, look, I'm more junior. I'm going to defer to the people who have tenure. I'm going to defer to the people who are more experienced. Well, just because they've been doing this longer doesn't actually mean that they know better. And I had a really telling moment when we were making a significant business decision, and this individual was saying something that didn't make sense to me. And I said, how does that match with what's in the spreadsheet? And she said, oh, I didn't even read the spreadsheet. And it was that moment of, oh, just because you're more tenured, you've been
Yeah.
doing this longer, doesn't mean that you necessarily know better. And so I need to not tell you what to do, but at least offer my perspective. Because together with all of those different perspectives and data, we will make a better decision.
Yeah, I think there's so many ways that we're cultured, socialized to do things, and it's just so easy to adopt these
Hmm.
behaviors without even thinking about it. I was just thinking of a simple example. I was at oh, last weekend. I went to my most favorite comedian, Jerry Seinfeld. So
Hmm.
I grew up loving Jerry Seinfeld, and He was talking. Oh, geez, I messed this up. Now I can't even remember. So I'll probably just have to edit this. We went to a show. It was Jim Gaffigan and Jerry Seinfeld, but I can't remember which one it was. So I'm gonna just, I'll just pick up again. Um, so this last weekend, I went to a show, comedian, and he was talking about how he wishes there was. The joke was, like there should be room in the back where it's just kids, Lord of the Flies, so we don't have to
Hmm.
hear the kids, right? And it's like a common joke,
Yeah.
like nobody wants to hear the baby screaming on the plane. But I was thinking that's a way that we're teaching parents that kids should be seen and
Mhm.
not heard. Like we don't even want to travel with you. We want you stuffed in the back, right? Again, it's kind
Yeah.
of a joke, but there's kind of some seriousness to that. So how do you push back on these things that we've learned or these things that society teaches us about how we should behave and when we should speak up?
Yeah, I want to be clear. I'm not saying throw everything out, right? There, we need some sense of order. I do want us to question it. Where does it come from? Who's making the judgments of what's appropriate, um, or what's too assertive? And that examination to me is part of the unlearning. Having the awareness is, okay, does this act, do I believe this? Or is this just what I've inherited? Is this how I want my classroom, my home, my workplace, my team to be? Or is this just what has become normed over time? I mean, this is the research around employee silence and organizational silence, the collective phenomenon of saying nothing because you look around and you don't see anyone else doing it either.
Mhm.
Is that what we want to perpetuate? It is often the path of least resistance to just perpetuate the status quo. And if it's not working or not working as well as it could, to me, it's that, hey, what about this works? What about this doesn't work? What might we try next? And the difference between unlearning silence and just learning a new skill is really needing to interrogate and at times excavate what are those operating assumptions that we just take as, well, that's just the way things are.
So when you're working with clients, when you're teaching classes and you're teaching them how to unlearn silence, are there like two or three kind of obvious places where people kind of tend to get this wrong? Like
Mm-hmm.
what? Yeah, geez, I'm
Yeah,
sorry. I normally don't have this many mess ups, but I will edit that part anyway. So just
totally fine.
pretend like I just stopped right there. So are there any places where you really like can help people right away?
Yeah. Let's break it down. The first is what are we talking about? And are we even talking about silence? So my own background is coming out of the Harvard negotiation project, getting to yes, difficult conversations, lots of
Mhm.
skills for how to do something. And unlearning silence is really a response to having taught that material for more than a decade, saying, wait, we're missing something here. We're not talking about power and we're not talking about privilege. We're not talking about the root cause of people, why people don't do this. So even just having a name for it, it's not you. It's not that you're fundamentally flawed. It's that there's this thing called silence and it's everywhere. So what is your relationship with silence? What role does silence play on your team, in your life, and in your leadership? That's sort of one bucket of thoughts. The other is just breaking down how silence manifests. There's the silence we've learned. So, in what ways might I self censor? In what ways might I sit in a meeting and be thinking, it's not a good idea. But then, Joe over there says the same thing and everyone thinks it's great. And I'm like, I should have said it. Right. In what ways do I self censor? And that's chapter 4 of the book of ways that we silence ourselves. Sorry, I should say the book is my book, Unlearning Silence, where I'm drawing this from. The second is in what ways do we silence each other? And that is probably the most uncomfortable part for everyone, for us to think, wait, I think of myself as a good human being. I support people. I
Mhm.
don't silence people. That's chapter 5 of the book. In what ways do we silence each other? And one clear way is just to assume that everyone else should look and sound like us. You see this most in corporate teams, right? There is one dominant norm about for how we talk and how we operate here. Oftentimes in corporate America, it's 3 succinct bullet points, no ums, just the right amount of emotion to show that you care, but not too much that you lose credibility, particularly if you present as female. And so we silence each other when we expect or require that other people fit into this mold, even as a precursor to hearing the substance of what they're saying, right? You need to show up in this way in order to be heard. So the what is mine to own? right? Might I be self-censoring? Am I aware of when that happens, why that happens? The second bucket is, in what ways do I silence the other people around me? 9 different ways that I parse out in the book. But one is just that assumption of you've got to talk in real time versus asynchronous communication or typing could be just as effective in communicating a thought, an insight, an idea, but we somehow dismiss it because we prioritize or require people who can speak off the cuff in real time, 3 succinct bullet points. Third category is systemic. In what ways do our policies support or silence different groups of people? We are still talking about return to office, and I am so sick of it. But the reason it's such a lightning rod issue is because it supports some people who have shorter commutes, are used to leading in person, are comfortable with that mode and medium, and it silences people who benefit from greater flexibility, have longer commutes, all of those aspects. So the question would be on the systemic front, who do our policies silence? Who do they support? So if we take individual, silence I've learned, ways I silence other people, and then systemic, you've got a framework for looking at what role does silence play on our team now, and in what ways might unlearning that silence unlock all the potential that's actually here.
I think so much of this just comes down to, from my perspective, is we're so prone to just start with like there's a right way and a wrong way to do
Mm,
things, and so we just need to just kind of get in line and follow the path. And so I love the perspective of like let's be thoughtful and ask difficult questions about, you know, is it the right way? Is there a right way to speak? Is there a right way to look? Is there a right way to perform? Now, of
mhm,
course, there are some like more effective and less effective, more tactful, less tactful, um, better ways to negotiate and worse ways to
mhm,
negotiate. And so I think maybe that's where it's like challenging. Like, how do we know when we're like, and I guess this is a question then. So, how do we know when we are challenging norms that were just given to us that we should challenge versus how do I follow like the best research on being an effective negotiator and not just saying, I'm just going to ignore everything that is taught in negotiation classes. I'm just going to do it my way. Like, how do we
yeah,
find that balance?
yeah. I would go back to, I mean, even this, what's the best way to communicate? There's such cross-cultural implications there. Best for whom?
Yeah.
Best for Eurocentric, best for corporate, best for, and you really see that when you work with global teams. And that if you're requiring someone to be in this North American centric, white male centric mode, then you are inherently disadvantaging people who don't come from that same place.
Hmm.
That may be an okay outcome, but let's be intellectually honest about it. You can think of it in time zones too, just to be really simplistic about it, right? If you're asking for 9 a.m. New York time, there's no perfect time zone where it's not 4 a.m. for someone else somewhere else in the world.
Yeah.
And it's going to be different energies just based on human capacity. I've tried to find the perfect time zone as a way of optimization. I have not found it. If
Yeah.
anyone knows it, let us know.
Yeah.
I don't think it exists. So it's not to say you don't do that. There's a reality that we work in, but can we be intellectually honest about the differential impacts? Particularly when it comes then to performance reviews and judgments of how it's done. The second place I'd go is can we interrogate where best practice comes from and the biases uh, and things that might be baked into the research so that research is data but not necessarily definitive. This is particularly salient, I think, in the case of leadership development books. More than 70% of them are written by white men. And that's not a knock. It's written from a particular point of view. And so if it's not working for you, it might not be that you're personally flawed or you're not doing it right. It may not actually work because of the embedded assumptions. I say that about my own work too. But if we take everything as data rather than definitive, it's pulling from what you think makes sense and would have input. And I'm inclined to also follow research, but also knowing that research is limited in its own way. So all of those inputs and then the practicality of what impact are you trying to have? What's actually working for you and for the people around you?
Yeah, it was such a great perspective. So I love the metaphor of the time zone. There
Mm,
is no perfect time zone. There are
You haven't found it
some,
either?
yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah.
It's impossible, obviously. Like there's no one best time zone. In the same way, there's no one best way to speak, to talk, to look, to
Mhm.
dress, on and on. Now, there are some that are more or less effective for some people, depending on the circumstance, right? So I think that's,
Yes.
and we should be honest and thoughtful about that. And then I love that phrase, data, not definitive. So let's use the data.
Mhm.
Let's use the best data we can,
Mhm.
all the while, as you said, being intellectually honest about who it's best for, what perspective we're taking into account, and so I guess just being more thoughtful. And you said it, intellectually honest about where the perspectives are coming from, who they help, who they
Mhm.
hurt. Well, so interesting, Elaine. Any final thoughts you'd like to share as we wrap up here?
Mm, I think the final thought really is noticing the different perspectives and relationships with silence. Meaning, so often when it comes to using your voice or being heard, we put the onus on the individual, right? If you're not being heard, you are the one who needs to unlearn your silence without looking at the systemic relational aspects of it, and that we each have an opportunity either to unlearn our own silence or to unlearn the ways that we silence each other. It's a both and how we show up for each other has a differential impact on someone's life, right? How someone experiences the world. So that to me is the opportunity both to stretch and flex for each of us to learn something and to fundamentally alter the way that someone else experiences the world.
That's so great, taking a much more holistic viewpoint on these ideas. Well, Elaine, I love the lessons. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast today, and I look forward to sharing these lessons with others.
Thanks for having me.